Jake was supposed to give a funny speech about our college years. Instead, he revealed a secret that made me question if I had actually earned my degree at all. The graduation party was everything I had dreamed it would be. My parents had rented out the back room of my favorite restaurant, the one with the string lights and exposed brick walls where I used to go to decompress after particularly brutal exam weeks. Everyone who mattered was there: family, friends from high school, college buddies, even my favorite professor who had mentored me through my senior thesis. The congratulations cards were piling up on the gift table, and I kept catching glimpses of my diploma in its frame, still surreal after all these years of work. Jake had been my roommate since sophomore year when we both got stuck in the overflow housing situation. What started as a housing crisis turned into one of the most important friendships of my college experience. We studied together constantly. Our dorm room transformed into command central every finals week, with color-coded notes taped to every available surface and empty coffee cups creating a fortress around our desks. He was the type of friend who would bring me soup when I was too sick to leave my room, who would stay up until 3 in the morning helping me work through calculus problems that made my brain hurt. When he stood up with his glass raised, everyone naturally quieted down. Jake had always been the funny one in our group, the guy who could make even the most stressful situations bearable with his perfectly timed jokes. I expected some embarrassing story about the time I fell asleep in the library and woke up with textbook pages stuck to my cheek, or maybe something about how I used to practice presentations in front of our mirror while wearing my lucky socks. But his face looked different tonight. Serious in a way that made my stomach clench with unexpected anxiety. He cleared his throat and looked directly at me, and I noticed his hands were actually shaking slightly as he held his wine glass. The words that came out of his mouth felt like they were happening in slow motion. He confessed that he had been doing all my major assignments for the past 4 years. Every research paper, every lab report, every project that had earned me praise from professors and boosted my GPA. He said he had done it because he was in love with me and wanted to help me succeed, wanted to be the reason I graduated with honors. The room went completely silent. Not the comfortable quiet that comes before a toast, but the suffocating kind of silence that follows a car accident or a devastating diagnosis. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room turning toward me, could practically hear the mental calculations happening as people tried to process what they had just heard. My parents looked confused and hurt, my professor looked shocked and disappointed, and my friends from other classes were staring at me like they were seeing a stranger. My face burned with humiliation. Every achievement I thought I had earned, every moment of pride when I received positive feedback, every time I felt confident about my academic abilities, it was all built on a foundation of lies. The Dean's List recognition, the scholarship renewals, the glowing recommendation letters that had helped me secure my post-graduation plans. Had any of it been real? I felt physically sick, like the room was spinning around me. All those late nights I thought we were studying together, he had actually been doing my work while I was probably just organizing my notes or highlighting textbooks in a way that made me feel productive but accomplished nothing. The memory of every study session became tainted with this new knowledge. How had I been so blind? How had I not realized that my sudden improvement in certain subjects coincided perfectly with when Jake and I became close friends? The shame was overwhelming. I thought about all the times I had felt proud of myself, all the conversations with my parents where I excitedly shared my grades, all the moments when I believed I was truly capable and intelligent. The imposter syndrome that had occasionally crept in during difficult classes suddenly seemed justified. Maybe I really wasn't smart enough to be here. Maybe everyone else had always known something I didn't. But then something in Jake's expression shifted. The guilt and nervousness transformed into something else entirely, something that looked almost satisfied, like he was enjoying watching me crumble. That's when he delivered the second bombshell that nobody in the room saw coming. He started laughing, but it wasn't the warm, familiar laugh I had heard countless times during our friendship. This laugh was bitter and cold, and it sent chills down my spine. He admitted that everything he had just said was a complete lie. He had never done any of my work. Every assignment, every paper, every project had been entirely my own effort and achievement. The reason he made up this elaborate story was because he couldn't handle the fact that I was actually the smarter one in our friendship. While he struggled with concepts that came naturally to me, while he spent twice as long on assignments that I could complete efficiently, while professors remembered my name and not his resentment had been building for years. He wanted to diminish my accomplishments in front of everyone who mattered to me because seeing me succeed made him feel inadequate. The room was still silent, but now the energy was completely different. Instead of disappointment and shock directed at me, I could feel anger building toward Jake. My professor's face had transformed from disappointment to fury. My parents looked absolutely livid. My friends were staring at Jake like he had revealed himself to be a completely different person than they thought they knew. Update 1. The immediate aftermath of Jake's confession was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The party that was supposed to be a celebration of my achievements turned into the most uncomfortable social situation I had ever witnessed. After his cruel revelation, most guests didn't know how to react. Some people started making polite excuses and leaving early, clearly wanting to escape the tension. Others stayed but avoided making eye contact with Jake, creating these awkward clusters of conversation that kept glancing over at him with obvious disgust. My mom, who had been so excited about this party that she had spent weeks planning the menu and decorations, looked like she wanted to physically throw Jake out of the restaurant. I could see her jaw clenched in that way that meant she was holding back words that would probably have ended his social life permanently. My dad kept shaking his head and muttering under his breath, and I caught fragments like, "Unbelievable," and "What kind of person does that?" Jake seemed to realize that his plan had completely backfired. Instead of making me feel small and undeserving, he had revealed himself to be the kind of person who would deliberately try to destroy someone's happiness on what should have been one of the best days of their life. He tried to approach me several times throughout the evening, probably to apologize or explain himself further, but every time he got close, someone would literally step between us. My friends formed this protective barrier around me without even discussing it. The most surreal part was how the evening continued after his bombshell. People were still congratulating me, but now their praise carried this extra weight of validation. My professor pulled me aside and told me that she had always known my work was exceptional and completely original, and that Jake's lie only served to highlight how threatened he must have felt by my abilities. She mentioned specific papers I had written and insights I had shared in class that she said demonstrated a level of critical thinking that couldn't be faked or borrowed. But the emotional damage was already done. Even though I knew logically that all my achievements were real, Jake had planted the seed of doubt that kept growing throughout the night. I found myself mentally reviewing every assignment from the past 4 years, trying to remember specific moments of writing or research that would prove to myself that the work was mine. It was exhausting and infuriating that I even had to do that mental exercise. The most unexpected reaction came from my younger cousin, who had always looked up to me academically. She approached me near the end of the evening and said that watching Jake's behavior had actually taught her something important about jealousy and friendship. She said seeing how his insecurity had turned him into someone willing to hurt me made her realize how crucial it is to celebrate other people's successes genuinely, even when they make you feel inadequate about your own progress. Jake left the party early without saying goodbye to anyone. I later found out from mutual friends that he had been struggling academically much more than any of us realized. He had been on academic probation twice, had to repeat several classes, and was facing the possibility of not graduating at all. While this context helped explain his behavior, it definitely didn't excuse what he had done. Understanding someone's motivations doesn't always make their actions forgivable. The weeks following the party were complicated. Word spread quickly through our social circle about what had happened, and Jake found himself pretty much isolated from our entire friend group. People who had considered him a close friend felt betrayed by his willingness to manipulate and hurt me for his own psychological gratification. Several mutual friends reached out to me to apologize for not recognizing signs of his resentment and jealousy that they now realized had been building for months. I started noticing things in retrospect that I had dismissed at the time. Comments Jake had made about my grades that I thought were just friendly teasing now seemed loaded with genuine bitterness. Times when he would change the subject whenever I shared good news about academic achievements. The way he would sometimes forget to tell me about study groups or review sessions that other people in our classes had organized. Little acts of sabotage disguised as absent-mindedness. Update 2. 3 months after graduation, I was starting to settle into my new routine when I received a message from Jake that completely blindsided me again. He had apparently been working with a counselor to address his issues with jealousy and self-worth, and part of his process involved making amends to people he had hurt. His message was long and detailed, acknowledging the specific ways his behavior had been harmful and taking full responsibility for his actions. But the real shock came at the end of his message. He revealed that there was actually a third layer to the graduation party incident that he hadn't shared before. While it was true that he had lied about doing my work and it was true that he had done it out of jealousy, there was something else he had been hiding. He had actually been secretly undermining me in subtle ways throughout our friendship that went far beyond just emotional manipulation. He confessed to deliberately giving me wrong information about assignment due dates on several occasions, hoping I would turn things in late and receive lower grades. He had accidentally spilled coffee on a major paper I had printed the night before it was due, forcing me to rush to reprint it and nearly making me late to class. He had even gone so far as to contact group project partners and tell them I was unreliable, causing unnecessary drama and stress in my collaborative assignments. The most disturbing revelation was about my senior thesis. Jake admitted that he had been secretly reading my drafts when I left my laptop open in our room, and he had been sharing details about my research with another student who was working on a similar topic. That student had then incorporated some of my ideas into their own work, which explained why my thesis advisor had seemed confused about certain overlaps during my defense. I had felt paranoid and confused during that process, wondering if I was imagining similarities that didn't exist. Learning about this systematic sabotage was somehow even more upsetting than the graduation party incident. It meant that not only had Jake been jealous of my success, but he had been actively working to prevent it. Every challenge I had overcome, every obstacle I had pushed through, had been made artificially more difficult by someone I trusted completely. The resilience I had built, the problem-solving skills I had developed, the confidence I had gained from overcoming setbacks, all of it had been tested by manufactured difficulties. The strangest part was that his sabotage had actually backfired in ways he never intended. By creating additional challenges for me, he had forced me to become more resourceful, more independent, and more confident in my abilities. When I nearly missed that paper deadline because of his coffee accident, I had to problem-solve quickly and discovered I worked well under pressure. When group project partners were initially skeptical of me because of his lies, I had to prove myself through my work ethic and ideas, ultimately earning their respect in a more meaningful way. His counselor had apparently helped him realize that his behavior was a form of psychological abuse disguised as friendship. The calculated nature of his actions, the way he had maintained a caring facade while secretly working against me, the gaslighting that made me question my own perceptions, it all fit patterns of manipulative behavior that went far beyond simple jealousy. But here's where the story took another unexpected turn. Along with his confession, Jake included screenshots of conversations and documents that revealed something I had never suspected. My academic advisor, the one who had mentored me through my senior thesis and who I respected enormously, had been aware of Jake's behavior for much longer than I realized. She had noticed discrepancies and patterns that suggested someone was interfering with my work, and she had been quietly documenting incidents and protecting me in ways I never knew about. When my thesis defense had been complicated by those overlapping ideas, she had already identified the source of the leak and had been building a case to address it through official channels. She had extended deadlines for me on several occasions, not because she was being lenient, but because she knew someone was deliberately creating obstacles. The revelation that someone had been looking out for me without my knowledge was incredibly moving. It also explained some interactions I had found confusing at the time. Moments when my advisor had asked seemingly random questions about my living situation or study habits, times when she had made pointed comments about trusting the right people, occasions when she had gone out of her way to validate my work in ways that felt more emphatic than necessary. Final update. The most surprising development came 6 months after graduation when my former advisor reached out with an opportunity that seemed too good to be true. She had been approached by a researcher at a prominent institution who was looking for someone to join a project that aligned perfectly with my thesis work. The researcher had specifically requested someone with my academic background and research interests. It turned out that my advisor had been sharing my work within her professional network all along, and my research had made an impression on people I had never even met. The systematic challenges Jake had created for me had forced me to develop such a thorough and innovative approach to my thesis topic that it had caught the attention of experts in the field. The very obstacles meant to limit my success had ultimately contributed to creating opportunities one never could have imagined. Taking this position meant relocating across the country, which felt like the perfect way to start fresh after everything that had happened. The work was exactly what I had hoped to do after graduation, and the team I joined was collaborative and supportive in ways that felt healing after years of unknowingly navigating Jake's manipulation. About a year into my new position, I received another message from Jake. This time, instead of confessions or apologies, he was reaching out to share some news. He had finally graduated after repeating his senior year, and he had started working with young people who were struggling academically and socially. His own experience with jealousy and self-destructive behavior had apparently given him insights that were helpful in mentoring others who were dealing with similar issues. He didn't ask for forgiveness or try to rebuild our friendship. Instead, he acknowledged that his actions had consequences that couldn't be undone, and he was focusing on making sure his future behavior aligned with the person he wanted to become. He thanked me for being unknowingly instrumental in his personal growth, recognizing that facing the reality of what he had done to someone he claimed to care about had been a necessary wake-up call. The strangest part of this entire experience was realizing how much stronger it had made me. Not in a grateful for the struggle way, because what Jake did was genuinely harmful and wrong, but in recognizing that I had already been resilient and capable long before I understood what I was overcoming. Every success I had achieved was even more meaningful knowing that it had happened despite someone actively working against me. My new colleagues became some of the most supportive professional relationships I had ever experienced. When I eventually shared the story of what had happened during college, their reactions helped me fully process how unusual and disturbing Jake's behavior had been. Several of them shared their own experiences with academic or professional sabotage, and I learned that what I had experienced was unfortunately not uncommon, but also not something I should minimize or dismiss. The research project I joined ended up being more successful than anyone had anticipated. The work we produced together earned recognition in our field, and I found myself presenting at conferences and collaborating with researchers whose work I had studied as a student. The confidence I had lost during that graduation party had been rebuilt in a much more solid way based on external validation from people who had no reason to be anything other than honest about the quality of my work. 2 years after graduation, I ran into some old college friends at a conference in my field. They updated me on various people from our program, including Jake. He had apparently continued his work with struggling students and had developed a reputation as someone who was particularly effective at helping people overcome self-sabotaging behaviors. Several people mentioned that he seemed like a completely different person than the one they had known in college. The conversation made me realize that I rarely thought about Jake anymore, and when I did, the anger and hurt had faded into something more like curiosity about human psychology. His actions had revealed something important about the difference between surface-level friendships and genuine support, and that lesson had influenced how I approached relationships both personally and professionally. Looking back now, that graduation party feels like a turning point that I didn't recognize at the time. Not because of Jake's dramatic revelation, but because it was the moment I learned that my achievements belonged to me regardless of what anyone else said or believed about them. The validation I had been seeking from others was never as important as the confidence that came from knowing my own capabilities and worth. The work I'm doing now builds directly on the foundation I created during college, including the resilience I developed while unknowingly navigating Jake's sabotage. Every challenge I face feels manageable because I've already proven to myself that I can succeed even when the deck is stacked against me. That's a kind of confidence that can't be borrowed, stolen, or given by someone else. It can only be earned through your own efforts and choices. The experience taught me to trust my instincts about people while also recognizing that someone's capacity for growth and change can surprise you. Jake's transformation from someone who would deliberately hurt a friend into someone dedicated to helping others avoid similar mistakes shows that people can fundamentally change their character with enough commitment and professional support. Most importantly, I learned that my worth and capabilities were never dependent on Jake's opinion or acknowledgement. Whether he had been secretly doing my work, secretly sabotaging it, or simply being a normal supportive friend, my value as a person and a professional remained constant. That realization was perhaps the most valuable education I received during my entire college experience.